Okay, so today we're going to talk about a different value which we use to apply to our rules by which we develop our social contract or our rules for social engagement. First week we talked about hedonism. Monday we talked about moral virtue, Aristotle. Today I want to talk to you about moral duty. Moral duty is Immanuel Kant, and he's our only deontologist that we'll study this semester. Deontology, of course, is two words, ontology and deontos, deontos meaning duty. Kant says what's important is the action rather than the consequence. If it's the right thing to do, we do it for the right reason at the right time to get the correct result. And the correct result is not the consequence, it's the duty that applies to this action. He will call this duty a goodwill. You'll see deontology, you'll see duty, you'll see goodwill on your quiz. So for Kant, whatever his theory is going to be, it's grounded in your will. Your will means you're choosing to do something, an action. And he says a goodwill is defined as one that's guided by duty. You do the right thing for the right reason at the right time. He says that is a goodwill. You make a choice to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And he calls that duty based on a good will. A bad will would be telling a lie and thinking you can get away with it. No honor, no duty, no code, nothing. So a good will is what regulates your duty to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Yes?
How do you spell Kant?
K-A-N-T. First name is Manny. Emmanuel. Now, Kant's world is really different. I mean, we live in the same world, but the way he approaches morality is really different. Let me ask you a question. Let's say instead of the online quizzes, we went back to 4 quizzes, 40 questions apiece, an hour. And I was to say to you, in order to maximize your time for the quiz, 40 questions in an hour, in order to maximize your time, I would suggest it would be imperative that you got here, because the test is 1 hour, it would be imperative, if you want to maximize your time, it would be imperative to get here at exactly 11 o'clock. What would the word imperative mean? Yes? Important. How important? In Kant's world, very important. Kant's world, his morality is based on agreements that are so important, it's imperative that you keep them. There's no wiggle room in Kant's world. Now, the upside to Kant's world is you don't have to agree to do anything. But once you agree to do something, you need to keep your word. You need to keep your bond. It wasn't that long ago, maybe 67 years ago, if you made an agreement with somebody and 2 or 3 people saw it, that was a contract. They could take you to court if you didn't keep your word. Or if 2 or 3 people heard you say something, an agreement to do something, and you didn't keep that word, they could take you to court. That was your word. That's why we say your word is your bond. And Kant says you don't have to give your word. You don't have to shake anyone's hand. But if you give your word, if you create a bond, you're bound to it. That's why we call it a bond. And that emanates from or comes out of your will, choice. You choose, you will to do something, and you bind yourself to it. And it's imperative that you keep your word. So things like promises for Kant are real important. I used to promise all the time, overpromise. Someone sent me an email this morning, said, I want to come in and talk to you this afternoon. Will you be there? And I said, well, I'm done at 2 o'clock. I go home. I'm not going to sit around forever. But I said, if you email me what time you'll be here, I will be here. I gave my word. In the old days, I used to overpromise. What happens when you overpromise? One, you can't remember all your promises, and therefore you can't keep your promises. And what happens when you live in a world where your word's no good? You're no good. People look at you and say, well, you know, I'm not going to make anything. Your word's no good. So in Kant's world, morality is based on the willingness to agree to do things. Now, you don't have to agree to do anything, but if you do agree, there's such force behind that agreement because you are choosing. Your will is involved. No one's twisting your arm. You're saying, okay, I will do that. It's my duty to fulfill my world. And that comes with no promise, no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no raping, no robbing. That's what a good will is based on. Everybody with me? Now, Kant calls that kind of imperative a hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative is always based on desires. Now, desires have an outcome, so it sounds like it's teleological. And Kant allows for desires to be involved because we're teleological. We do things for reasons. However, in Kant's world, whatever desire motivates the action is what's important. Everybody follow that? So here's an example. I want to go to the movies and I want to go see the accountant. I don't want to go alone. So I call my friend John up. I say, hey, you want to go see the accountant with me? He says, well, I don't know when you want to go see. How about Thursday? Okay, what time? Let's go 4 o'clock. Everyone else will be out eating. He says, okay. So what did we just do? In Kant's world, we just agreed, made a hypothetical imperative based on each of our desires to see the same movie at the same time. Now, because we agreed to do that, because our wills were involved, Kant says I have to keep my will. The goodness of my will is now on the line. Is my word any good or not? I didn't have to agree. John didn't have to say he wanted to go to the movie. He said, I don't want to go at 4, let's go at 6. Nah, I don't want to go at 6. Okay, well, let's put it off for another day. But we agreed. Once you agree, once your will is involved, you have to make good on your will, and it becomes your duty to keep your imperative. Everybody with me on that? It's not difficult. Okay. Okay. However, we also said that while the rules equal the law, and the law we want written in stone, we also need just a little bit of flexibility, because sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to. So in Kant's world, Kant says there's one condition and one condition only where you don't have to keep a hypothetical imperative. Extenuating circumstances. Extenuating means extended out. It's beyond my control. So 4 o'clock, I'm bringing my boy home from daycare, ready to go to the movies with John, and my boy starts throwing up blood. I'm not going to the movies. I cannot control what's going on with him. It's beyond my control. And I will it to be a higher priority because life may be at stake where it's just a movie with John. And John will understand that. But if I go to the movies at 4 and John doesn't show up, I want to see the movies, so I sit through it alone. And I get home and I call John and I say, hey, so what happened? I thought we were going to be at the movies together. He said, hey, you know, Dick called and I decided I'd go down to Nico's and have a couple of beers instead. That's not extenuating circumstances. That's a competing desire. And Kant says that cannot, a competing desire cannot violate a hypothetical imperative. Only extenuating circumstances. So, since you don't have to agree to do anything in Kant's world, I suggest you think about it before you agree. Because agreement is the centerpiece of goodwill. It's the foundation of moral agreements. Look, people, when we agreed to live in the box, we made an implicit, not explicit. When you were thrown in the box, you didn't have a choice. But when we stayed in the box, when we grew up in the box, when we decided we were going to follow the rules of social engagement, we made an implicit agreement to follow the rules. Our will became a part of the agreement. No lying, stealing, cheating, raping, and robbing. And I told you that story about me driving down the highway and getting busted. Yeah, and I used to get in trouble for telling the truth because what I did was wrong. And if I didn't fess up to it, I got in bigger trouble. Because the world I grew up in, the truth was as important as anything else in the world. If you don't tell the truth, I can't trust you. Your word's no good. There's no value to our relationship, you know, until death do us part. You know, loyalty in a relationship. And once that's broken, the relationship it's really hard to restore that. That's how strong the trust has to be that we keep our word, we keep our bond. We exercise our will, and it's an exercise of will. It's a choice we make. We will to follow the imperative. No one can make you. Look, you're driving down the road today. You have a license. It's not a requirement. It's a privilege. You showed up at the Motor Vehicle Bureau and said, I'd like to have a license. And they said, here's the test. Show me you know how to drive. So you took the test. You don't even have to get 100% right. Can you imagine a marriage that wasn't 100% right when it came to law? But you get enough of it right, they say, fine. Now we're going to put you in a speeding bullet and see how well you do. That's called a car, a speeding bullet. And see if you can follow the rules of the road that you just said you understood. You know, there are some countries where they don't follow the rule. I spent a lot of time in Mexico. You go driving in Mexico, there are no rules in Mexico. There's yellow lines on the road. There's no rules in Mexico. And there's no shoulders in Mexico either. I was driving to Monterrey one time. I had a bunch of people with me in a van, and we're coming around a Cordoba curve. And there's no shoulder where you can pull out. They call it arroyos. And I mean, it just goes right down. And if you hit the arroyo, you're going to roll, and you're going to get at least injured if you don't kill yourself. And we're coming around this big curve, and here's a car coming this way. Well, you know, someone comes, and it's around the curve. You can't see around the curve. You stay in your lane, right? And here comes someone pulling out around the guy who evidently wasn't going fast enough, and I've got nowhere to go. Red light, green light. There's some imperatives out there that are so imperative that if we don't follow them, lives can be lost. I had Mexicans who would come up northern Michigan. They'd work for a fellow who owned a nursery, a friend of mine. I would translate for them. Every once in a while, they wanted a car, a driver's license and a car. So I go out with them to translate for the instructor, you know, so you look, you have to do this, and then you go out for their test. You know, you don't have to stay in your lane in Mexico. Just find a place. And it's okay, everybody knows that. When you come, you know, they have these big circles you go around, and if you can nose your car in there, it belongs to you, you know? And that's how you go around the curve, you know? I've even done that. I've done that with la policía, with the police. And I mean, you come real close to them, and they act like it's just, am I going to get a ticket? No, just, you know. But if you don't follow the rules of driving, what happens here? Sometimes, hopefully most of the time, you can lose your ticket. Or you get a penalty for not following the rules. And we use deontological ethics when it comes to regulating, not making, but regulating the rules of social engagement. No lying, no stealing, no cheating, no raping, no robbing. So we're going to incorporate teleological principles, what we want. We're going to incorporate deontological principles, how we regulate the rules, and they're all going to mix together. That's why it's not just a one-size-fits-all. Everybody understand that? So any questions about hypothetical? Almost all imperatives, Kant says, are hypothetical. They're based on desires. We want to do something, and so we commit ourselves to it. More importantly, he said the second kind of imperative is what he calls a categorical imperative. A categorical imperative is the law, right here. It's how we regulate the rules. In Kant's world, you cannot break a categorical imperative. So when you get your driver's license, that's based on a categorical imperative. Therefore, he calls a categorical imperative universal law of practical reason. Universal means it applies to everybody. Red light, green light, and lying, stealing, cheating, raping, robbing. For Kant, then, the categorical imperative are laws, social regulations we have that apply to everybody without exception to the rule. And they're the safeguard to our social contract with one another. They're not flexible in that regard. You don't have to worry about waking up tomorrow and there's no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press. Those are the rules of social engagement.